My collecting years, when I knew very little, he was very instrumental in me choosing a direction to go in picking the things that I like. Via email, he continued to educate me over a couple of years, and that's how I came to know Mr. Walt Vogdes. Would you please make him welcome?
It went green, Lynn, so I guess you can hear me. Is the mic working?
Well, you got to get a little closer.
How about now?
No.
Where's the volume control, Lynn? Hello.
That doesn't go through the PA system.
Ah, okay. All right, so I will just speak loud. Today we're going to spend less than an hour talking about Rookwood. And most of us recognize Rookwood as this type of stein. You see here a portrait of a gentleman sitting in a pub. The background is invariably dark, normally brown, oftentimes shaded, the background shaded from a dark color to a lighter color somewhere on the body. Here are a couple more pieces, again very typical of what we know most commonly by the name of Rookwood. Here are a couple vases that were in the auction 2 days ago, I guess that was. Again, portraits or semi-portraits. Here's another stein. This is particularly nice with the silver mounts. Portrait again. And another very similar stein, again with the same kind of silver mounts. However, these last two steins were not made by Metlock as the first pieces were. These steins were made by Rookwood Pottery in Cincinnati, Ohio. These pieces, masquerading under the name of Rookwood, are total imposters. I want to talk today about Rookwood Art Pottery of Cincinnati, Ohio. What I hope to do is to be able to show you some beautiful ceramics, discuss the history of Rookwood pottery, give you some idea of value. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, I know a lot of you see Rookwood when you go into an antique shop. There's a good chance that you will have already recognized it. If you haven't recognized it previously, hopefully you will after my talk. And Rookwood is worth knowing about if you buy pieces for resale, because it does carry good value. So I want to give you some sense of what the values are. Also want to point out the changing role of women in this era, and in particular how they influenced Rookwood pottery. And I want to show you another source for steins other than the stein auctions that we're all most familiar with. The conclusions that I want to lead you to are that Rookwood pottery is high ceramic art. Women put the art in art pottery. How many women decorators do we know of at Metlock? As much as we've studied the Metlock factory and its workers and its artists, how many women do we know of? I don't think we know of a single one. Who is it? Okay, but there are very, very few. And for the most part, we as a group don't know about them. Rookwood pottery steins are available. They did make steins. The steins are a small part of their output, but they are available, and they're much more available than you might think just from watching the stein auction catalogs. But they come at a price. Typically, they are decorated as portraits. There's a series that were made in a floral design that were used for presentation pieces. There are rarely others, although I will be able to show you a few. Artists decorated Rookwood Pottery steins are far more interesting than Metlock Rookwood, and I want to be able to explain to you how they were made at the Rookwood Pottery and versus compare that to how they were made at Metlock. Maria Longworth Nichols, born in 1849, was the founder of Rookwood Pottery. Here's a photo of her. She's got a palette in her hand. She was born into one of the most wealthy families in Cincinnati, the Longworths. She was privately educated, meaning that she had tutors, she went to private schools. She did not go to university. She was small in stature. Looking at her here, you kind of get the impression of a fiery personality, and I think that's what she was. Although it's noted that she was a careless money manager, probably because she didn't have to worry about money a whole lot. In the 1870s, there was a China painting craze sweeping through America, particularly in the Midwest. This was a practice of taking undecorated pottery and decorating it in the home and then firing the paints onto the pottery. And Maria Longworth Nichols was one of the practitioners. She used borrowed facilities. She talked her way into one of the local potteries and was able to use their kilns for firing her work. In 1879 in Cincinnati, there was an organization formed called the Women's Pottery Club. Its members were among the most prominent socialites in Cincinnati. And although Maria Longworth Nichols did not belong to this, she certainly instigated its formation, and she stayed outside of it for just out of personal reasons. Rookwood Pottery was founded in 1880 in an old schoolhouse that was down on the flat part of town near the river. It ultimately moved, and I'll show you some photographs where they moved it. But the focus from the beginning was on fostering the development of art pottery and commercial wares, and in fact, being a commercial success was kind of a secondary thought. It was a necessary evil. She named the Rookwood after her father's country place. Rook, of course, referring to the raven or the bird, the black bird seen on this tile. And also, interestingly enough, because she thought Rookwood sounded kind of like Wedgwood, which had some cachet associated with it. The first kiln was drawn on Thanksgiving Day in 1880, and for the first few years they did have some financial difficulties, and if it was not for the strength of her father, Joseph, the pottery could well have gone out of business before it ever really got started. Here's a line drawing of the pottery after it was moved up onto Mount Adams. This next photo gives you a better idea of the nature of the topography in Cincinnati, and you can see the pottery up there right on top of Mount Adams up here. And there was a tramway that ran right up the mountain here to carry foot passengers up to the top of this mountain, Mount Adams. Here's a photograph of the gates of entry into the factory. You'll hear me call it factory. Apparently, at the time, the owners and the operators and Maria Longworth Nichols preferred to refer to it as a workshop as opposed to a factory, because it was not mechanized and it was not intended to be mechanized. It was intended to be more of a studio. The gates here, there are 3 rooks on top of each of those gate posts, which is the only reason that makes this photo noticeable. I'll give you some idea of what they made. They made vases, candlesticks, ewers, vases, teapots, mugs, vases, plaques, ashtrays, vases, past cups, vases, humidors, steins, vases, tiles, garden ornaments, and vases. Because they did some tile work that I want to talk to you about, this was not some of their early work. It came along, in fact, some 20 years after the firm was founded. But it's an easy part of their line to dispose of, so I'm going to speak to it first. They introduced a line of tile and architectural faience in 1902, and oops, sorry about that. And shortly thereafter, they got their first important commission for 4 subway stations in New York City. If you've passed, I beg your pardon, this is Grand Central Station, it's not a subway station. So if you've been through to the trains in Grand Central Station, you may in fact have passed under this tile work on your way to the train. They followed that work, that commission up with a number of hotel installations. This is called the Norse Room. It's in Pittsburgh's Fort Pitt Hotel. Again, it's tiled. You can see the same style of ceiling as we experienced in the Rathskeller last night. Ceiling is all tiled, the columns are all tiled, and in fact the scenics on the wall are tiled. I do not know about those Viking ships that are used as part of the lighting fixtures. I don't know whether they were tile or not. Another hotel was the Della Robbia Room in the Vanderbilt Hotel in New York. None of these installations, other than the Rathskeller downstairs, are still surviving to this date. Here's a photo from the Rathskeller that I was able to take the other night. This is, of course, an apple tree motif. It was planned in 1907. Not sure when the installation was finished, but the apple tree motif and the archway and the cityscape along the bottom are indicative of a period around 1907, the middle years of the Jugendstil or the Art Nouveau period. Here's the famous pelicans that we heard about a little while ago, the good luck symbols. Here's a view of the bar. The bar is a very nice room in that it has 2 of these tiled scenics side by side. And it wasn't until I went into the bar and for some reason looked up that I noticed the ceiling that he spoke about this morning. This is a leather-covered ceiling. And it's decorated, as you see here, with signs of the zodiac. I was born in the middle of June, so Gemini is the one that I zeroed right in on. And it's got a very Otto Hoop kind of feeling to it, the Otto Hoop being the famous heraldist who did a lot of work for Metlock. So if you didn't see that last night and only heard about it for the first time in Larry Johnson's talk this morning, take a few minutes and go back down there. The door, excuse me, the door is open and you can walk in and take a look at the bar. They also produced garden ornaments. Here you see something that looks like it's life-size. We have a figure here in the front which appears to be a mermaid. If you look down at the lower part, seems to be a mermaid's tail down there. And we have some kind of a bad actor with horns, curled horns on both sides of his head, about to carry her off. And I'm told that this is Floyd taking a prize back to Salt Lake City. Here's another example of some of the garden work that they did. It's just an absolutely huge jardiniere being tended to by one of the workers at the pottery. I really want to focus, however, on their artist decorated wares, meaning that every piece of the artist decorated wares that you look at, you can tell who decorated it, the artist who painted the scene on the body. This is a photo of their decorating staff. We're very, very blessed to have good records from Rookwood. A lot of photographs. Please. A lot of photographs are available. We know the names of probably 90% of the 250 or 300 decorators who over the years have been involved with at the pottery. Albert Valentien, who is seen here as the second from the left in the back row, was the first decorator hired by the firm. The firm started 1880. He was hired the following year, 1881. And you notice here for the first time we have, what, 3 men in the photo and a number of women. Women were very, very prominent in the arts and crafts movement at that time. I said artist, I mean artist. This is one of the decorators making a sketch from cherry blossoms, and she's going to use that sketch later then to guide her in decorating some of the pottery pieces. The decorators, as you might suspect, quickly divided themselves into different categories of quality and capability. One of the authors of the many books that have been written about Rookwood pottery classified them into the A list, the B list, the C list, and so on. So I'll just point out a couple of names here that we're going to see again. Albert Valentien down near the bottom of the A list column. Shira Yamadani, I'm going to show you a photo of him in just a minute. He was a Japanese fellow. Carl Schmidt, Sarah Sachs, Matthew Daly, we will see some of his works. So if you see a piece of Rookwood pottery and it's priced at $600, let's just pull a figure out of the air, and you want to know, is it worth $600, is it worth $300, or is it worth $3,000? This list is a good thing to know about because it will help guide your evaluation of any individual piece. Here's a photograph of Kotaro Shirayamadani. The name is, that last name is very intimidating until you hear somebody pronounce it, and then it's really fairly straightforward. He was at Rookwood for over 60 years, from 1887 to 1948. He did have a sabbatical in Japan but in the years between 1912 and 1920, but he was a backbone of their company and is considered one of the most talented and one of the most collectible artists. Pardon me? Oh. Rookwood, like Metlock, is also very well marked, which is important to collectors. The first mark that they used is shown at the top, Rookwood, and then it has a date, 1882. That is not a particularly interesting mark for most of us because they didn't start making any wares that we would be interested in or that we're likely to find, for that matter, until after 1884. In 1884, they adopted the mark seen at the left, the backwards R and the P, both sharing the common downstroke. 1885, they added what has generally been called a flame right at the top. And then they decided that that was a good way to date their pieces, so they began at the lower left side just adding one flame for every year until they got to the year 1900. For the years after 1900, the mark on the right is actually 1901. So they showed the years in the 20th century in Roman numerals underneath their trademark. Trademark is impressed into the base and it serves as the date. All of the artist decorated pieces were signed. These are 95% impressed, scratched, hand scratched into the base. Some of them were stamped into the base by some kind of a die, but most of them are hand scratched into the base. So they developed their own signature, their own monograms that they used. So that's how you can date and identify who decorated an individual piece. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about their major glaze lines because that's the way Rookwood has been categorized by all the collectors and the students of Rookwood pottery. So I'm going to talk about all of these different periods. The early years, being the first 4 years of operation, were a time of searching and experimentation. Rookwood was always trying to find glazes that would show their artistic works to best advantage. Maria Longworth Nichols was a dominant figure during this early period. She did bring in the other decorators. But she is described as having undisciplined exuberance. And you'll see from some of her works that she was idiosyncratic, and she used some fairly bizarre subjects, things that we would not normally be attracted to. A lot of her works, or a lot of the works produced during this period, are referred to as being in the Limoges style. Exactly what that is, I can't tell you, but looking at the works coming out of the Rookwood factory, I can tell you which ones came from that period. They did have some utilitarian wares that they were producing in two lines, one called Ivory and one later called Cameo. They were not particularly interesting, will not be particularly interesting to collectors. And something called a dull finish, which is interesting and it is artistic, but it was only produced for a short period of time and it never had a lot of followers. Here's a vase by Maria Longworth Nichols, about 1880. It is known as the Aladdin vase. You see it's covered with a fisherman's net, and you see some marine animals trapped in the net. This vase sold for $16,500 in 1992. Here's another of her pieces with a dragon around the neck. I don't expect to ever see this when I walk into any of your homes. It's not something that you'll ever find in my home either. Yet it sold for $21,000, so if you see it in an antique store, don't dismiss it. Another example of her works, this one is decorated with bats, which makes it very consistent with some of her other works, but the addition of the witches riding the broom really makes all the difference in the world in terms of your personal reaction to it. That's from 1882, 16 inches tall, over $12,000. Now, she wasn't the only one decorating at this time. Here's a piece that was produced or decorated by Albert Valenciennes, 1882. You see an owl, and again, it's kind of a bizarre piece. The line that they really became best known for is called the Standard Glaze, and they began that in 1884. The Standard Glaze really is a glaze over a slip painted decoration. It's a yellow tinted translucent glaze, meaning that you can see through the glaze and see the decoration underneath. The ground was made with an atomizer to shade the colors from a dark area to a lighter area, and from a lighter area back to a darker area. The background colors are generally brownish, some green, occasionally some blue and yellow, but they gently fade from one color to another, providing a nice, interesting background. The decoration, though, is really significant in that they painted with slip. Slip is clay dissolved in water. It's liquid clay. And they painted it on with paintbrushes. So they painted in this, with this slip, layering the slip onto the body. When it was fired, of course, the slip changed color as part of its firing. So one piece of the trick that you had to learn was what color slip to use to generate yellow, or to generate green, or to generate shades of red, or anything else that you were trying to achieve. The unique thing about slip decorating is that you can feel the decoration. It's not like a Metlock pug where the decoration is entirely flat. It is raised. It's in very low relief. It's decorated on the wet clay. It was not, the piece was not fired before it was decorated. Then the glaze adhered to the clay body. Then it was fired, then glazed and fired again. Here's an example of one of their pieces. I told somebody I was going to show some of these vases the other day, and they said that their impression was that these were gaudy vases. I don't know whether you consider this gaudy or not. I certainly consider it to be a work of art. It's just so delicate when you look at the way that was painted. Now, this was painted either using live flowers on a stand next to the decorator, or from a sketch or a photograph. But it was done totally by hand. This was Albert Valenciennes, 1899, and it's in the Museum of Industrial Arts in Oslo. Here's another example, and you can get a sense if you look at the middle, at the shoulder area here, right around here, you can get a sense of the buildup that comes from painting with slip. This one has silver overlay on it. The Rookwood had a cozy relationship with Gorham for a few years, Gorham Silver, where they produced the ceramic and then sent it to Gorham to be decorated, have the silver overlay added, and then it was marketed as a Rookwood piece from that point forward, and Rookwood still had the interest in the ultimate sale. This was sold at a David Rago auction in 2001 for $2,300. David Rago runs one of the primary arts and crafts auctions out of Lambertville, New Jersey, and you'll see him often on Antiques Roadshow. I'm going to talk pretty briefly about the next three lines, the sea green, the iris, and the painted matte. They were all variations on the original standard glaze, but they used some different colors which generally resulted in a lighter work. It was a green tint. The sea green was a green tinted, translucent, high gloss, again with slip decoration. Because of the green, the favored motifs were fish and waterfowl, although they did also do a lot of florals. And as with the standard glaze, decorated on the wet clay, fired, glazed, and fired again. Here's an example of a vase with a lily. This is sea green, decorated by E.T. Hurley, 1898, $2,200. Just as a personal note on this piece was described in their catalog as repaired all around the rim, to give you some idea of what a damaged piece can bring, a damaged or a repaired piece. This piece was mine a few years ago, and then I consigned it to Rago for sale. Here's another example of the sea green glaze, $6,400. These values are worth knowing about. Another example, $23,500.
What's the size?
Don't know. I would guess 16 or 18 inches. Iris glaze moved away from the green of the sea green and towards it was a colorless glaze, which allowed a more subtle color palette for the artist. Favored motifs for this glaze were flowers, birds, fish. The artists would decorate a piece and then they would mark it on the bottom, the base, before it was fired to indicate what glaze should be applied to it. So the artist decorated with the glaze in mind, and a particular piece could be decorated in one glaze or another. Again, decorated on the wet clay, fired, glazed, and fired again. Now you see a lot different color family here. This is the iris glaze, 1904, $690, not a terribly high price. Here's another iris glaze, again, a lot lighter in its coloration. Carrie Steinley. Third iris glaze piece by Olivia Reed. We'll see some drinking vessels that she did later on. The next four glazes I'm going to kind of cover as a group. These are very different from what you've seen up to now, and if you study the techniques that they use and you learn about these things, these are quite remarkable pieces. What makes them different, and what you have to keep in mind as we look at just a few examples, are that the matte glazed pieces, the matte glazes are all opaque. You cannot see through them. So all the decoration that you're going to see is done in the glaze itself. There's no gloss. They have a matte finish. And this is a description that Rookwood used in one of their catalogs. Their texture is itself delightful, a pleasure to the eye and to the touch, whether the surface be decorated or not. They said that the surface is no longer designed merely to protect the color beneath, but now itself is the dominating interest. That is accurate, but it really doesn't help to explain the matte glazes. The matte glazes are opaque. Now, how in the world did they do this? This, to me, as I learned how they had made it, is just an astounding piece. The body is covered with the ground color. That was the easy part. Then they carved out the design. The design was actually carved out of the body. The stems, the flowers, everything, and removed. And then replaced with a colored glaze. So the red that you see, the yellow that you see, is glaze that was painted in by the decorator, and then it was fired. So that is the surface of the piece. Quite remarkable. Here's an example of a technique that we should recognize. This is what they called conventional matte glaze. This is a lamp base, obviously. It was made with solid colors outlined in black. The outline of the decoration was painted in slip. Have we seen anything like that? Threaded relief. Think threaded relief. They painted the outline, the black outline here was painted in slip, and then glaze was filled in into the colored areas. And the outline was, of course, was raised, and it kept the colors from slipping and sliding all over the piece. This is from a line called incised matte glaze. It's not terribly interesting to me. You can see that the glaze was put on and then a decoration was carved into it. And most of these pieces used Indian designs of some sort. Indian in the sense of something very geometric in its nature. This is the modeled matte glaze. Here you can see some pieces in relief, but again, not something that's terribly exciting to look at. Then one of the lines that they had that became very, very successful and is very highly prized is the vellum line. Again, from the catalog, this variety differs from all others. It's devoid of luster, does not have any dryness, and it is supposed to have the look and the feel of old parchment. This again gave the artist more control and a wider color palette. So here's a vellum piece, $4,000. Another vellum piece, $2,600. Another vellum piece, and here you see a scenic. They did like to do scenics. They didn't do a heck of a lot of them. The vellum was particularly well suited to it because it provided a kind of a hazy overall effect. Give you just a quick sense of how these glaze lines developed. In the beginning, the first 4 years, there were some rather bizarre subjects, and those were in the Limoges style. The standard glaze originally favored flowers. The standard glaze stayed in production for many years. With the introduction of the iris and the sea green glazes, we began to see more marine creatures. And the standard glaze in 1890 began to produce portraits. And the portraits were enjoyed about 1 decade of true popularity before they began to fade from the scene. So almost every portrait that you find will be between the years 1890 and 1900. And the matte and vellum glazes, again, continued to use flowers, but also used some scenics. I'm going to show you a number of group photos from out of the catalogs, auction catalogs that I've collected, just so to give you a little practice in recognizing the different periods. You see here on the left, in the Limoges style, 1882, one of the first 4 years the factory was open. There are 2 pieces of standard wear here, 1901, 1895. And again, the standard glaze was used over quite a long period of time. The iris glaze up on the top a few years later, 1903, and the vellum glaze even later, 1920. Here are 3 pieces of standard glaze, the dark brown ones. 1901, 1900, 1899. So very quickly you can get a sense for when a piece was produced just by recognizing the particular glaze line. The matte glaze seen here all the way to the left, that's a later piece, as is the one in the center. Again, an early piece, the Limoges style, shown what, third, fourth from the right, second from the right, fourth from the left. Two standard glaze pieces, the lowest one and the one all the way over to the right. A vellum glaze introduced in 1915, and then an even more modern drip glaze of some sort. Here we have three standard glaze pieces, 1892, 1889, 1889, and a vellum glaze, two vellum glaze pieces. One, the Scenic, is dated 1920. The other one didn't have a date specified. Here we see the first Rookwood Stein. This was produced in 1948. This is probably the most common Rookwood Stein that you'll come across. It was made for Weideman's Brewery. The piece on the right is an early piece. The piece on the left is a standard glaze piece. The green piece is the sea green glaze, 1901. And then you see the vellum Scenic, 1918. Standard glaze, well, let's see, Limoges style over here towards the left, the jug down there, down at the bottom. The standard glaze in that funny looking drinking vessel with a curved handle, 1899. Iris glaze, 1904. The piece with the elephants, if anybody in here owns that piece with the elephants, I'd like to find out about it. I love that piece. And then 1935, a matte glaze piece. And you can see that the distinctive change in the artwork on that later piece. It's just not terribly artfully done. Now we're going to talk about drinking vessels, and I promise I'll show you some more steins. I'm going to start off with mugs, then I'm going to go to three-handled pass cups, which hopefully all of you are familiar with. We'll take a look at a couple so-called puzzle jugs, and then we'll look at their steins. This is a high glaze mug produced in 1948. Again, it's another output for the brewery industry. This is for Falls City Brewing right here in Louisville. Here are two standard glaze pieces, a portrait on the left and a child, it's kind of a whimsical scene of a child on the right. The one on the left was decorated by Bruce Horsfall, 1894. Harriet Wilcox did the other piece, 1892. The two sold together for $2,600. No lid. Here's a piece decorated by Sturgis Lawrence, one of their prominent decorators. Standard glaze again. It's a portrait mug of a black boy, 1896. This piece sold for $1,645, despite the fact that it was noted it has a firing crack. And that's the word they use, crack. Portraits of blacks and Indians were popular, and they tend to be pricier today. And there was somewhat of a fascination at this time with the blacks and with the Indians, and the feeling was that they led a life that was closer to nature. They led a simpler life, and it was just very much in keeping with the arts and crafts tenets of simplicity. Here's another piece. This one has silver mounts, although again no lid. Black boy, Grace Young, 1900, and this one sold for a little over $3,000. Here's that same portrait, again by the same artist, Grace Young, and the same year, 1900. So she was presumably working from a sketch or a photograph and produced these two different pieces. This is an Indian portrait, White Wolf. A lot of the portraits are named for the individuals that are portrayed, and the name is on the base. This one by Flora King in 1946, it sold at a relatively low price for most Rookwood, $429. I don't know whether that was because of the date it was produced, which is fairly late in the cycle, or whether it was because of the artwork, but I don't consider this artwork to be terribly attractive, so it may have been a combination of both. Here's another piece that I don't consider to be particularly attractive, but it brought a nice price, $4,700. This is named as Chief Mountain Big Brave of the Blackfeet, again by Grace Young, 1899, $4,700. Here's another motif that you see from time to time, the corn. This is almost always an American design when you see corn on ceramics. 1898, Lenore Asbury, sold for $368. Take a look at the detail, how much detail you can see there, because I want you to compare it to a piece that's coming up in just a second. This is a piece obviously with a dog. It's a mug decorated by artist Van Briegel, who was an artist at Rookwood until his health turned bad, and he went to, relocated, I believe it was to Denver, I know it was in Colorado, where he started his own pottery. And his works are generally very highly sought after. The asterisk on this price means that it was noted as damaged, but I don't remember what the damage was. Here's a piece with silver mounts, Gorham silver mounts, Harriet Wilcox, and it shows the Cheshire Cat up in a tree, $3,300. Another whimsical piece, and this piece really does show the shading of the background from the darker tones to the different colors. Silver mounts, William P. McDonald, 1892, $2,500, and it was noted as being extensively restored. Now you know what that does if looking at a Stein catalog. If you see the words extensively restored, you know what that's going to do to the hammer price. So here this piece brought $2,500 despite that description. Another mug with a monkey up a tree, Matt Daly, $633. An iris glaze mug. The iris glazes and the other glazes other than standard are not terribly common in the mugs and the other types of drinking vessels, but there are some. This piece was not particularly highly thought of. Here's a piece that was a little bit more desired, brought almost $1,200, produced 1903. You notice that the iris glazes are tending to be in the early years of the century, but definitely after 1900. Here's a pass cup, three-handled pass cup. It's in the standard glaze. I was only able to obtain a black and white photograph. And then I looked at this for the longest time and only saw the one monkey, but actually there are two there. They're quite visible if you just get past the blind spot. And that was produced by Bruce Horsfall, 1895. Bruce tended to do portraits, and I would include animal studies in that category. He left Rookwood and became an artist of animals, specializing in animals. Here's again a pass cup that has a Germanic connection. This is a portrait of Bismarck, done by Sturgis Lawrence, 1901, over $1,000. This piece was on eBay. In June, it was offered at $850. It got no bids. It was by Amelia Sprague, 1900. Contrast the artwork on that with the sensitivity in this portrait by Grace Young of a Native American girl or boy, 1898, sold for $3,500. Another portrait pass cup by, I think it's Olivia Geneva Reed, 1899. And here's a piece decorated by Shira Yamadani. His themes were very imaginative. Here we see a stringer of fish with a couple fish hooks hanging down. This was produced in the, I think in iris glaze in 1908. Here's a piece, another piece in the standard glaze with mounts, Gorham silver mounts. This again was by Bruce Horsfall, and it shows 5 satyrs in the moonlight fleeing with a stolen goose. This was sold by Cincinnati Art Galleries in 1991 for $15,500. Puzzle jugs. Here's a one in standard glaze. This was Sturgis Lawrence after a Grutzner painting, $633. And here's one that sold much more recently, a puzzle mug by Bruce Horsfall again, Treadway Gallery, June of this year, $1,440. The major sellers of Rookwood Pottery are Rego Auctions, Treadway Gallery, and Cincinnati Art Galleries. And by major, they put out a catalog that is half an inch thick, probably between 1,000 and 2,000 items, and the auctions are extremely popular. They're well subscribed. Here's the first stein we're going to look at, and I'm going to kind of take a step backwards on this. This is actually a Metlock stein. It's a Form 1909. It has a hollow base. It's the hollow base half liter. It's hand painted in the Rookwood style. This was my stein a few years ago. I hope one of you out in the audience owns it now, because I did sell it in an auction. It's a beautiful piece, and here's why. The painting on this, I swear if you had that in your hand, you can look at it and you can say, I can count the hairs in his eyebrows. It's just very, very remarkable. It became clear that this was painted by someone who was very close to the Rookwood factory. It's a Metlock blank that was painted by someone close to the Rookwood factory, but I was never able to find any artist signature on it. Here's a piece that unlocked the puzzle of who this is. This is a piece that sold at auction, and it gave a description of who the individual is. This is Joe Jefferson, who was a master of American comic stage and an international stage star. And it shows him here portrayed in the role of Caleb Plummer in The Cricket on the Hearth by his friend Sturgis Lawrence. So he was close to the factory, despite the fact that he was an actor and a vaudevillian. This piece sold for $2,500, but it allowed me to identify the Metlock stein. Here's another piece depicting Joe Jefferson in his most famous role of Rip Van Winkle, which he appeared in that play over a long period of time, $2,400. And here's a picture of Joe Jefferson actually in the factory at Rookwood decorating a plaque. He just enjoyed going there. He felt at home in the artist community, and while he was there, he took advantage of the facilities. Simple stein. This is the Weidemann Brewing stein, 1948, sold for $385. I don't want to offend anybody, but if you own one of these pieces, hopefully you own it because of your interest in the brewery. Because if you're interested in Rookwood steins, almost any Rookwood stein that you buy will be better than this piece, more artistically desirable. Here's a Rookwood stein that has silver mounts, Bruce Horsfall, 1894. It's a portrait. That may be Rembrandt, I'm not sure. Here's a second piece with the same silver mounts. Here's another piece, and I'll talk about the pewter work here. Rookwood had created a metalworking shop in 1894, and it was in operation for only about 3 years before they decided that the pewter that they were producing, while the pewter was nice on the steins, they produced very few steins, and it had very little use anywhere else. They later did do some work with silver after their arrangement with Gorham was dissolved. So they did do some silver work, but again, that was very short-lived. So most of the Rookwood stuff does not have Rookwood metalwork on it, with the exception of the 3-year period from 1894 to 1897. So this is a Rookwood original lid. Now, I suggested earlier that you look at the corn, at the detail on the corn. Compare that to the detail on this piece. And that is not just because of the difference in the photographs. This piece was decorated by Kotaro Shirayamadani. You notice a little bit different color here too. He's got some green at the top and the brown at the bottom. This piece sold for almost $5,300 in June of '07. Again, that is Rookwood pewter. This is Rookwood pewter. This is another Shira Yamadani stein. This piece shows it's a pond scene with water lilies and frogs playing cards. Unfortunately, I'd like to see more of that scene, but unfortunately this is the only photo that I have. And that sold for $3,000. This is the only piece in this shape of a floral decoration that I was able to find. And this piece came from a Ron Fox auction in July of 1987, and the only color photograph that he had was about 1 inch high. So I scanned that photo and blew it up and trimmed out the background, and it's a kind of a crappy, crummy job, particularly if you look at the handle. The handle's just not realistic at all. But that's my photo editing and not the stein itself. But this is a floral design. When I say floral, I include the fruits on a branch in the standard glaze, and it is the only one that I've seen in this particular body style. This stein was a very pleasant surprise when I came across the photo. It's again a very whimsical piece. $2,550, William P. McDonald in 1894. This is standard glaze, although obviously in a very lightened color shading. Now, where did that come from? Well, there are a number of photographs of this type showing different costume get-togethers that the Rookwood artists participated in. Let's think about this for just a minute. This was an arts community, and the artists hung together. They socialized together, they enjoyed themselves together, they partied together, and they partied at Rookwood. So it may very well be that this particular party, where they were dressed as clowns, served as an inspiration for that stein that we just saw. After I found the first stein, and I was so pleased with it, I came across a second stein, and this is by the same designer. Again, Rookwood pewter on both pieces. And to cap it off, here's a third piece. And these pieces were all sold separately. Remember, they came off the line, they came off the artist's stand one at a time. And the artist, after he did this, who knows what he did next? He may have done a floral, he may have done a portrait, he may have done something completely different. So they were produced one at a time. How many of them are there? We have absolutely no idea. But these three pieces taken together would certainly make a wonderful Rookwood, small Rookwood collection. This is another piece that shows the Rookwood logo around on the front. You can't see it in this photograph. 1896. This one was pretty highly thought of when it was up at auction. $7,700. Again, the standard. This is the iris glaze. I'm sorry. Here we see a portrait of Rembrandt. This is by Bruce Horsfall, 1895. This was in Andre's auction just the other day. It was, it was estimated 4 to 5, and I think it did not sell. Is that correct? Did not sell, $3,200. Rookwood pewter on it. Another piece by Horsfall, 1895. This was in Andre's auction in September of last year. Whether it sold, it was estimated 4 to 5,000. It was not sold, not reported as sold in the auction results, but Andre tells me that he did sell it. I'd like to have another crack at that piece. Another Native American portrait, Bruce Horsfall, 1895, and this was in Andre's auction back in 2002. Another one from Andre's auction, November 2004. Note the body style here, the inlaid lid, the thumb lift, and the shape of the body. This is a portrait of Andrew Jackson. It's marked on the base as being for Old Hickory, Sturgis Lawrence, 1896, and I don't have a record of what this sold for. Black and white, same body, same inlay, different thumb lift, I think. But again, it's Rookwood pewter. This was by Matt Daly, and it's a portrait of Edwin Booth. Another portrait by Matt Daly, this one being Nathaniel Hawthorne. Same body style. Now we have a frog as the thumb lift. Another Matt Daly portrait in the standard glaze, and we only have the black and white photo. But this still does have an inlay, but it's flat. This little monkey was showing up regularly at antique shows in the Northeast for a number of years, and I just was never able to screw up enough courage to buy it. It's in standard glaze. We see a monkey carrying a champagne bottle. Bruce Horsfall again, and it was Andre sold it in November of 2004. This piece some of you may remember seeing and perhaps even had in your hand a few years ago. It was in the Schwartz collection in 1996. It is thought to have been decorated by Kotaro Shira Yamadani. I'm not totally certain of that. That was my memory from the auction. The auction catalog did not call that detail. The auction catalog, I think, said it was 1896, but they gave no indication of how they arrived at that. And it shows 6 skeletons picking grapes. Most of us who were at that auction in April of '96 were kind of startled when the bidding started on this piece, and it just went up and up and up to 15.9. And the story after the auction was that it was bought by a Deadhead, a Grateful Dead fan. Now I want to talk about a series of steins. Rookwood produced I'm going to say Rookwood produced no series except for this one set. You could consider the clowns to be a set, and you should, but they were not in the business of making series. This series is presentation steins that were made for the Commercial Club of Cincinnati, which was organized in 1880. Its members were drawn from the most prominent civic leaders, and they took turns serving terms on the Commercial Club. And their purpose was to promote the commercial prosperity of Cincinnati. Turns out in 1894, William Watts Taylor, who was at that time the president of Rookwood, also served a 1-year term as the president of the Commercial Club of Cincinnati. And he had these steins commissioned to give to the members of the CCC when their year of service was over. Here's an example of one of these steins. It's the standard glaze. It's got a floral or a fruit decoration. This particular one was a presentation piece to Julius Dexter. It was decorated by Mary Norse. The dates, I showed 2 dates there, and the reason for that is because we find these steins with a date in the body, in relief on the body, of 1894, because that's the year of service that these steins were presented for. But if you look at the date code on the base, the date code on the base says 1895 in most of the ones that we've been able to examine. Well, the reason for that is because they weren't presented until 1895, so it's very understandable. This piece sold on eBay in 2004 for $1,300. It is in my collection. It's the only piece of Rookwood that I have. Here is a list, thanks to Rich Kress. Rich Kress and had one of his salespeople go to the library in Cincinnati and was able to obtain a list of the members of the CCC in 1894. The names that are seen here in the lighter colors, Julius Dexter, Howard Hinkle, Bradford Schinkel, Lucien Wilson, James Mooney, John Townley, those are the steins that I'm about to show you. We've seen those steins. We know exactly what they look like. There are 50 steins in this set. Now, most of you could clear off your shelves and manage to find room for 50 pieces to replace them. So this is a closed set. There are 50. There's not 51. There's not 49. There are exactly 50. And guess what? Every single one of them is different. The body has some relief decoration around the upper rim and around the base. Around the base it says Commercial Club of Cincinnati. Up at the top in Roman numerals is the year 1894. And then the artist decorated the central portion. Here you see what the lid looks like. The lid, I was unable to figure out which was the right side up to look at this lid. It's got 3 C's for this Commercial Club of Cincinnati, and it's got the winged wheel symbol of commerce. On the right you can see the inscription to Julius Dexter from William Watts Taylor in 1894. And down at the bottom you can see it's body number 784. That defines the shape, or 783. That defines the shape. You see the Rookwood logo here, and if you count the flames, you'll come up with 1895. Then you can see the artist's initials, MN for Mary Norse. This is another one of the 50. This is the piece that was presented to John Townley. Totally different decoration than the first one. This one sold for a little over $1,000. There's another piece sold for $2,400. This is the one to J.E. Mooney, again decorated by Mary Norse. Same pewter, same inscription under the lid. Here's a piece that was presented to Bradford Schinkel, decorated by Daniel Cook. So there were a number of different artists who did this decoration, and I suspect there were probably 6 or 8 artists who were asked to produce these steins. This piece sold for $850. It was noted as having some damage. This is a piece, Rich, are you here?